Alright guys, my name is Metagoblin and today I'm going to be talking about the Rogue Tank Leveling Guide for Classic WoW. So I've talked about this build a lot on my channel now. I've also referred to it as the Ghost build or the Ghostly Strike build, and this is the precise build that I used leveling up a month ago when Classic WoW launched. So just before we start talking about the build, guys, please do me a quick follow on Twitch. I'm going to be streaming my raids over there very soon. In fact, I am going to be streaming tonight as I upload this video. So I'm by no means saying that this build is the most optimal leveling build and it's better than the standard kind of boring combat swords leveling build. I'm not saying that in any shape or form. What I am saying is it's definitely a more fun and interesting build, and I definitely recommend going for this build over going for a more 2% optimal build, because it will definitely be more engaging and more interesting to play. The main reason for this is because we're going to be using Ghostly Strike, which is just simply an extra ability that you can use in your rotation. It's quite fun and flavourable to use. It also has a really cool animation, which is another thing that makes it stand out. And what you're trying to do is optimize your character for the maximum defense or defensive capability of your rogue as much as possible. And what makes that really fun is that you can start to basically deal with more difficult encounters, for instance taking multiple enemies on at once at an earlier level, or you can take down elites, you can take down, well, just complete very difficult quests on your own without needing a group, because you're just a little bit more tough than the typical rogue. So let's run through the talents. I'm going to spend quite a lot of time on the talents because it is important to talk about and understand why we're going for certain talent points. So yeah, expect a lot of detail in this section. I'm going to go through every single point one by one. So first of all, I'm going to spec into Master of Deception, which is an absolute godsend of a talent when it comes to leveling. It is really unappreciated because a lot of the time when you're leveling up, you're going to be stealthing near enemies which are slightly higher level than you, which means they have a severely increased chance to detect you. Stealthing around is really difficult when you're a low level as a rogue, or just to be honest, in the whole entire leveling experience. A Master of Deception, especially stacked with the Shadow Meld ratio for Night Elf, is an absolute godsend, and you can stealth close to enemies without any problems, for your pickpocketing, stealth openers, and it's generally just really useful. From here, we're just going to max out Camouflage, just for the increased speed. It is a slight good convenience, which is quite useful. But the main reason why we're going into this into Subtlety Tree is to get Ghostly Strike. We're not going to go any further than basically specking deeper than this. So let's talk about Ghostly Strike, which is probably the main spell that this build focuses around, okay? A strike that deals 125% weapon damage and increases the chance to dodge by 15% for 7 seconds awards 1 combo point. So the main reason why Ghostly Strike is so valuable is because of that increased dodge chance. You will probably get about 35 to 45 dodge chance for 7 seconds with Ghostly Strike active, which is about a third to a half of a normal mob fight, which means in this build you're going to be able to chain mobs much easier. So you're going to have a lot less downtime, in my experience anyway, because you're simply taking much less damage, and again, like we mentioned before, you're going to be able to deal with much difficult encounters. Another thing to bear in mind is Ghostly Strike is actually quite a significant amount of damage. Okay, it does 125% weapon damage, and that will actually be more than Sinister Strike. Sinister Strike does 100% weapon damage plus a little bit extra. However, if you have a really slow main-handed weapon, slow hand mace, or a one-handed sword, then this, the 125% weapon damage becomes quite significant, and it will do more damage than Sinister Strike, and it especially becomes very useful when you're using Blade Flurry to cleave targets down, because you do a lot of damage with Ghostly Strike. So that is an important thing to note. Obviously, probably one of the main criticisms of this build is it's going to do less damage because it doesn't focus on doing damage, but I feel like the increased damage from Ghostly Strike kind of makes up for that a little bit. From here we're going to spec into combat, and by and large we are just following the standard kind of combat spec with a few alterations, because we are going to focus on maxing out lightning reflexes for the increased dodge and the increased parry chance. So this provides us an extra 10% avoidance on top of probably 25% that we're going to naturally get from our gear, because when you are stacked out in agility gear, you probably get about 20 to 25 passive dodge from your agility gear, no matter what level you are, and obviously you add a 10% to that, and then you obviously add an extra 15% for when you pop Ghostly Strike, and then when you pop Evasion, you get max. You'll probably be able to achieve 100% avoidance with Evasion active, which means for the entire duration of Evasion, you will take no melee damage. You may be thinking, well, what about casters? Well, as a rogue, you can make any mob a melee mob, essentially, because you can kick caster mobs to force them to do melee attacks instead. From here we're going to get Riposte. Riposte is an extremely useful ability. One, it's an extremely significant damage increase because it does 150% weapon damage, which is really underrated. And it disarms a target for 6 seconds, so when you're dealing with a target that actually has a weapon, you're going to further reduce the damage that you're taking. And then from here, unfortunately, you kind of have to be a little bit boring. You kind of have to follow the standard combat spec, otherwise hitting enemies is going to be a little bit of a pain in the backside, and it's going to massively reduce your damage, which will massively reduce your efficiency. So this is why I would recommend with going for precision. However, you can force yourself to never do quests which are yellow or orange, by basically doing quests at a lower level, and you can go for more riskier talents here. But in my experience, I would prefer to just go for precision. And then from here, you really just kind of follow what kind of, the standard combat spec. However, at this point, I actually didn't... Well, obviously you get Blade Flurry as soon as you can as well, because Blade Flurry is a huge, massive, advantage. From here, obviously, you are picking a weapon specialization talent. You're not going to go Daggers, generally, because Daggers is going to be bad for this build. As we explained before, we really need a slow weapon. Sword spec is obviously really great, but if you don't have a sword, then it's not going to be too great. So most people are probably going to think at this point go for sword specialization, because it's the best talent for go for at this point. However, when I went like a totally different way, and there's a reason for that, because when I bought my mount, I had a little bit of money saved up, and I looked on the auction house and I found this bad boy, which is Wirt's Third Leg. Now this is a ridiculously good weapon to have at level 40. It has a really high weapon damage, and it also has 9 agility, and you can buy this very cheaply off the auction house. I think I got it for 3 gold, so I bought 2 for 3 gold. I dual wielded them, I got them both enchanted with increased weapon damage, and my DPS it literally doubled. I'm not even lying. Like I was doing dungeons at the time, and when I bought these 2, I was doing a little bit dungeon farming, and my DPS literally doubled, which is like really good. And obviously another great thing about this weapon is the fact that you're going to get a massively increased dodge chance with a +9 agility on the weapon, and the stamina, nearly an extra 100 health as well. So you really cannot complain with this weapon. And these lasted me, until Thrash Blade basically, and that's obviously like in the mid kind of 50s. So this is going to last you a good 15 levels, and obviously if you're not using swords for the 15 levels, then I would recommend going for mace specialization. And as I started speccing deeper into mace specialization, I started to notice how ridiculously good that the proc on this mace specialization talent is. So let's read it. Increases your mace skill by 5, which is another great thing. It means you can get increased weapon skill earlier in your leveling process, which obviously increases your hit chance even further, and gives you a 6% chance to stun your targets for 3 seconds with a mace. And this does proc quite frequently, I'm not going to lie, and that extra 3-second stun is ridiculously useful, especially if you haven't opened up with a cheap shot. And again, that is going to reduce the damage that you take even further, because the enemy that you're dealing with won't be able to actually damage you. So you're basically even more tanky. And then from here, you just kind of spec normally. You get weapon expertise, aggression, adrenaline rush, and you only have a few points left, which I can't remember. I think I put them into remorseless attacks, and I think then I finished off in malice. Doesn't really matter at that point, because you're probably gonna. I think I've respec'd anyway to a more typical combat build at that point, because I was just doing dungeons, farming my gear and stuff. So there you go. There is the tank build for Rogue. And that's it, Bob's your uncle. Just wanted to correct a little issue with what I previously said. Obviously, you do not spec into weapon expertise if you've gone for mace spec. But if you are switching over to swords, then obviously go for weapon expertise. But if you've gone for mace spec, it makes literally no sense to go for weapon expertise. So let's talk about gearing. For the most part, you just kind of gear exactly how any normal rogue would gear, to be honest. But I am going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. Obviously, we covered the topic just a little bit briefly before about weapon speed. You really do want a slow weapon with this build, because if you don't have a slow weapon, then Ghostly Strike won't do more damage than Sinister Strike, and obviously then therefore Ghostly Strike is a little less useful. So you really do want a slow one-handed weapon. Doesn't matter if it's a mace or sword. Just, equip it and get on with it. And again, I would recommend buying Wirt's third leg, because it is basically going to complement this build really, really well. Apart from that, what you want to be doing is prioritizing stacking agility extremely high, because that increases your dodge chance. You really want, a good 20 to 25% passive dodge chance, just sitting there in the background, because that really does complement this build. And apart from that, I would recommend stacking some high stamina pieces, obviously to increase your health pool, to make you a little bit more tanky. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the rotation and playstyle of this build. But by and large, it is exactly the same as like how you normally play a rogue, but obviously you have Ghostly Strike and rotation, which changes it slightly. You do prioritize Ghostly Strike over anything because 1, it will be higher DPS, and 2, obviously it gives you that dodge chance, so you want to use this as soon as you are starting to get meleeed in the face. Obviously maybe after a kick, if you're dealing with a caster, you probably want to use the kick and then Ghostly Strike, because otherwise, if you have Ghostly Strike buff active on your character but you're not actually getting meleeed, then it is just kind of a waste of time. So one thing to clarify, obviously you can kind of see that Sinister Strike right now is doing more damage than Ghostly Strike. It seems like when you get higher ranks of Sinister Strike, when you get in the later levels, that it does take over and damage in Ghostly Strike, but I do promise you, in the earlier levels, it does do a lot more damage. So generally, you open with the Ghostly Strike and then you follow the just kind of typical rotation that you normally follow. When it comes to your finishers, you kind of have to feel the waters of it a little bit and experiment with your kill time. Most people recommend to just do Sinister Strike and then use Eviscerate for the maximum damage. However, sometimes when you're leveling up, Eviscerate damage is kind of crap, and the reason for that is because it's a low rank. It'll be like a low rank compared to the enemies you're dealing with, in which case I generally tend to do 2 combo points and then I use a Slice and Dice instead, and that does tend to do a little bit more damage, but that's only at certain level ranges where the Slice and Dice finisher actually takes over, and then you kind of finish off with a smaller Eviscerate, maybe on 3 combo points. But again, you kind of just have to experiment and feel the waters. And apart from that, obviously use Riposte whenever it's available, because it's a massive DPS increase, and obviously you will be taking less damage if you're dealing with an enemy with a weapon. Use Blade Flurry pretty much whenever you can use it to take down, and always use it obviously to deal with 2 mobs at once. And then Adrenaline Rush, ideally you want to use Adrenaline Rush basically just before an energy tick goes off, which you can time with an add-on, because you want when Adrenaline Rush is active, you want the maximum duration of a full energy tick. So use it kind of just before the tick is about to go off, because the latency lag will probably cause the Adrenaline Rush to occur when the energy tick has happened. But if you feel like you've got a really good internet connection, like seriously good internet connection, then use it like straight after the energy tick. Those are my general recommendations when it comes to the playstyle of using this Ghost build.